Hello, everybody. Welcome to our session today. We're going to be talking about the fair data maturity model that was developed and the recommendations that were developed in a working group that is housed within the Research Data Alliance. And we'll give you links to the various resources so you have a chance to take a look at them more in depth. So I'm Shelley Stahl. I am the Vice President of Open Science Leadership at the American Geophysical Union. I've been working there. I just had my anniversary. I've been working there for 8 years now. And I focus my work on not only open science, but also all of the digital products that support research, primarily in the earth, space, and environmental sciences, but also across many domains. There's a lot of similar challenges in all of the domains. And I am delighted to partner with SciELO on one of our grants that we're running across 5 different countries. And it's been a delight to work with SciELO over the last 5 or more years towards challenges in fair data and open science. So it's an honor to be here for this session. So I would also like to introduce our speaker. Both Edith and I will be speaking today, and Edith will kick us off. Edith Herzog is an RDA council member. She also is a founder for the European RDA community that was stood up, and she's a member of a number of expert groups, and one of the things that I value about Edith is that she's able to see many of the challenges around culture change when it comes to open science and fair data, and help to navigate where decision makers are needing help and how we can support them through more improved resources like the fair data maturity model, like the types of information that policymakers will need. And so that will be a lot about what we talk about today. So she is the senior advisor for GIANT, and GIANT, as many of you will know, supports a worldwide network connecting researchers. So fantastic. Edith, would you like to get us started? I will bring up your slides.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. And I'm very happy to work again with Shelley. We worked a lot within the RDA in different contexts. Maybe just to add as an introduction that I'm not a scientist, although I have been many years ago, but I am more a politician, spent 10 years in the European institution, dealing with the research files. So I try to close the bridge between the researchers and the policymakers to move with the open science hand in hand. So this is our presentation today, and I'd like to welcome you also on behalf of Keith Russell, who is the co-chair from Australia. He couldn't be with us today, but he helped us to put together the file. So you can see that the RDA Data Maturity Model Working Group has co-chairs from 3 continents, Australia, US, and Europe at this stage. And we are very happy to be here and celebrate together with you your 25th anniversary. We can move to the next slide, Shelley. So we decided to make a presentation in 2 parts. I will explain the short history and the working method, which also explains that how RDA generally works and how especially we worked. And then Shelley will talk more about the use cases and the more practical use of what we achieved. So we can go to the next slide, Shelley. So start with the methodology, timeline, and the scope, and with the underlying RDA principles across the work. When you try to sort something out for a globe, then the openness, the consensus, the inclusivity, the harmonization, the community, and the commitment to the technology neutral non-profit association like the RDA it's very, very important, and I'd like to highlight how did we do it during the work. So the working group methodology, we can go to the next slide, Shelley. We decided not to reinvent the wheel. We started what we had already. When we started the work in 2018, already several different measurements for fairness has been mushroomed around the globe. And we had already the agreed FAIR principles, the 40-some FAIR principles which were issued. So we were starting from that. Then we had a bottom-up approach, which has 4 phases. We defined our work, we developed the method, we tested it, and finally we delivered it within 18 months. So we didn't work on how to use the FAIR data maturity model. We wanted to make it so it's a what we try to respond with our question. And we can go to the next slide. So that was the very detailed work plan. You can see the different rows with the different colors. And as you could see, the definition building was the most difficult part to get an analysis and to get the right questions. And I'd like to show you some of them because I think that it's important to see that how we develop them. Then the development and the testing and the delivery is still ongoing because we have several use cases which just started. We can then go to the next slide, which is about the definition of our work. And I think that we can jump again to the next slide, Sherry, thank you. So we used the questionnaire, and we understood that the 11 existing fairness measurements were extremely diverse. They had a different scope, they used a different semantics, they used a different measurements, they used a different frequency to make it again and again. The format and the visualization was extremely different. And what I'd like to highlight here, which underlines that it's not a technical work, but also a societal and the cultural issue, the measurement terminology came with the connotations, either be a positive or negative. It was a problem because it gave the feeling that we gave a negative result for something which is a pioneer work. Yeah, if you just start to make open science and if you just try to measure the fairness, of course you cannot be fair from the beginning, but just because you do not get a very positive score, it doesn't mean it's negative, yeah, because the positive thing that you started. But on the other side, we recognize also that some of the positive outcome of the first evaluation gave the feeling to many that, oh, it was easy and it's done. And we have to emphasize that it's not done, yeah. To be fair and to be open science, it's a transition which will take a long time and the long steps, and the FAIR maturity is only one of them. Yeah, so we had to be very careful, and it was very culturally sensitive that which kind of connotations we come with our fairness model to do not mislead neither the researchers, neither the management of the institutes or directors of the universities, neither the policymakers that is too easy or it's a mission impossible. So finally, we agreed that what we will do, you will see it here in the table. I'm not reading it because meanwhile I was speaking, you could read it, so we can go to the next slide, which is the development. Yeah, so in the development, we followed the method that we made a very heavy desk work all the time, and then we hold a small prep meeting for the group leaders. And then we organized 2 workshops to answer the questions which we raised during the desk work. And the workshops are here twice because we wanted to have a global approach. So to manage the time zones and to make it comfortable for everyone, we organized the 2 workshops on the same day that the people from the different part of the earth can join, and they have not to get up too early in the morning or they have not to stay too long at the night. And then we consolidated our results and we went to the plenary for the face-to-face meeting, and we discussed with everyone in the face-to-face and the hybrid format the open questions. And for those questions, as you see in the next slide, we try to make it, you can go to the next slide, we try to open the questions in the form that it was kind of easy to answer, so the binary opportunities were offered. And I just like to mention one. It was one question: if the FAIR data maturity model should be used for machine readability only, or it can be used for any kind of data. Yeah, so just give you an example that we try to simplify the questions that the many people in the room could tell their opinion. So it's only to show the case. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So then we developed, we went through the FAIR principles, all of them, and then we tried to identify that it's something mandatory or a recommended one. And it's a societal issue, because if we use the language that it's mandatory, then it simply must be done. And maybe it's not must be done in any in all the research institute, or maybe it not must be done in each single country. So the language was the most difficult exercise for us to choose. But here just you see that how we evaluated the FAIR data maturity principles one after one, and we try to give them some weight. Always discuss with the community. We can go to the next one. Here you can see that what was the result, this mandatory, recommended, or optional. We divided it to the findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And here I like to say that, for instance, the EU institutions originally had the idea to introduce it in the Horizon Europe as a criteria. But finally, we could successfully explain to them that it's far too early. The maturity model can be used, but maybe not as a mandatory for to get a research fund. It's too early. We are not yet this point, at least not in Europe, but probably not anywhere else in the earth. So we can go to the next slide. So we developed the scoring, which again, we try to use the visual format, which is neutral, which doesn't have this good or bad connotation, which is very important. Otherwise, all the researchers who would enter to the open science would get some negative evaluation regarding the FAIR data maturity model. It is not inspirational enough. So we thought that we have to make it as simple, as neutral as possible, but still show that how something, how the work, where they are with the work. But as I said, even the level 0 is better than if you do not ever talk about the open science. So we are in the pioneering phase, and we just beginning at the work. We can go to the next slide. So we went for a testing, and for the testing, again, we returned all the 11 fairness measurement entities or communities, and we asked them the question. We asked the question also from the that time existing European projects to introduce it and ask their opinion about, should it be mandatory? What should be the responsibility of the indicators? How to assess them? Should we do it per indicator, or should we do it among the indicators, or how we measure the ultimate fairness? So it was a very open-minded questionnaire to everyone who worked with us to test the FAIR data maturity model. And then we can go to the next slide. We promised to deliver our work within the 18 months, and we did it. So before I end, I'd like to underline once again that the biggest lesson during this journey, that it is as much societal issue, as much a technical issue to work on the FAIR data maturity model, which seems to be a technical work, but actually it wasn't. So I think that it proves also that the RDA mission to build the technical and societal bridges is an important one. And if you decide to join to the RDA and to our working group, then we are very welcome, but we need to work on both. And then Shelley, just move to the last slide. Here you will find the FAIR data maturity model, everything you have to know about it. Everything is available on the GitHub. You can see the process. You can review in the past all the questions which were raised and responded. And I am happy to say that at the moment we have 338 people in the working group, and I think that this is the proof that it's an interesting work. So if you decide to join, we are very welcome. And I'd like to give the floor now to Shelley, who will introduce more the researcher element, that how the use cases work. And Shelley, the floor is back to you. Thanks again for the invitation.
Edith, thank you so much. So let me head over to our next slide. Great, part 2. And so I'll tell you what, I'm going to back up just a little bit. So it's something to really highlight now that Edith has set out the challenge that we were looking at and the method, is maybe to give that a little bit more context for SciELO and for Latin America in general. So we're talking about the fair data maturity model. And this is initially focused on research data. There are other digital objects. It does apply to other digital objects, and there's a number of organizations that have been doing that work. And I'll pull that concept in a little bit. Further, FAIR has been this concept of FAIR. It's an acronym. It stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And one of the they use the word convergent. When we talk about the fair data principles, there's a word that's being used called convergent, or this particular paper that came out in 2016, and Edith, if you don't mind popping that into the chat for everyone, I know it'll take you a minute to find it. It was published in Scientific Data, one of the Nature journals. And what it drew everybody's attention to is it wasn't discipline specific, it was general to all research data. We really need to focus on the ability for that data to be fully understandable and interoperable, such that any researcher could access it easily, as openly as possible. Not all data can be open, we know that, but it can be understandable. Another element here is the realization that research teams are working internationally. So not unlike a project that AGU has partnered with SciELO on, we're also, that same team also includes researchers from Japan and France and Australia. So when we work together, these fair data maturity models are common across all of our countries. And the idea that we would think through what it means for data to be findable, accessible to any researcher, any society, interoperable in ways that support research endeavors, and then reusable, whatever as you're aggregating your data and you want somebody else to reuse it, that enough information is there. And one specific use case that's super I want to say popular is not a word we use in research, but really important right now across the countries is things around artificial intelligence and machine learning, where they're gaining access to data and the ability for a machine to understand what that data is, if it's usable, what the uncertainty is actually difficult. Not all data is well documented in a machine actionable way. So the FAIR principles focus on machine actionable, but they also need to be human understandable. So that gives you a little context. And when you think about something that impacts research worldwide and all phases, this is quite large. So the work we did within the working group was to provide this framework. And this is what Edith walked you through. What does it look like to actually implement the fair data maturity, the FAIR principles? And how do you think about it iteratively, such that you can approach it in a way that's doable? People can get very intimidated. If you read all of the elements required, it can be very intimidating. And frankly, as Edith was indicating at the end of her talk, not all of the elements are fully developed. So despite the fact that we have this wonderful publication about the fair data principles, not everything is achievable in all disciplines. So you have to give some flexibility within your teams to researchers. So you remember back on, let's see, this right here on the right-hand side, we have recommended or mandatory. So mandatory means this is something we believe is required in order to fully implement the FAIR principles. But we also realize that, for instance, metadata standards are not as fully developed across the disciplines. So the conversations that were happening within the team are, let's just recommend it, best you can do as we develop these capabilities across the disciplines. Okay, so, and this was a conversation. Edith talked to you about language, how we say things in each country, and it's not the same. I can assure you. Solange Santos and I just went through this lengthy translation process for a product that supports FAIR, and it was very detail-oriented, thinking through what each word meant and how it should be said in Japanese, in French, in Spanish, in Portuguese, and it is not the same. So imagine we're trying to do this in English such that it's understandable in other languages. And Edith, if I'm correct, we did get it. We do have a translation in another language. Maybe you can help me remember.
German.
Yeah.
The German scientist community offered it free of charge to translate the entire documentation to German, and now it's available in the web page.
Great. And then the other link that it would be great to give them is our paper, not only the recommendation, but the paper we wrote for, I think it was the CoData journal that, I don't know if you can hunt that link down too. Okay. All right, let me hop forward. So there are
maybe Shelley, just one sentence on the language.
Yeah, go ahead.
We had to translate it also to the politicians and the policymakers.
Yes.
And they speak absolutely a different language.
Yes,
mandatory in the legislation is a different wording than mandatory in the science. So it's not only the interpretation between the different countries and the different domains, but within the policymakers and the politicians and the research community. So it was mission impossible in the beginning.
But beautifully, it actually it worked. So to tie the connection together, so SciELO just joined the Research Data Alliance as an organizational member, and this gave SciELO an opportunity to actually immerse themselves in all of the recommendations. And this particular talk comes from that engagement, which would just in the last few months, as something that would be valuable within Latin America, within the work that's happening. SciELO is very forward-leaning on open science, and I'm delighted that you have this this speaker series, the seminar series. So okay, so I think maybe I added some more context, and so let me so this is very researcher oriented, but we can't leave out any of the players within research. So the use cases I have for you today are selected very specifically. There are more. There are many more use cases, but I think this one will give you context. And if you're finding the framework, the maturity framework, valuable to you, then you'll have a sense for which use case would match your organization. And so both of these are so the first two are related: the European Commission as a funder, and then the European Open Science Cloud, which is a capacity building within that also the European Commission is funding. So the two of them are related. And then the one on the bottom was developed bottom up by researchers asking a US government entity to change their existing processes to implement the FAIR principles. So I spent a little bit more time on the third one because I think that might be more relevant within Latin America. And that's my puppy Noah. So, okay. All right. So the first one, you're familiar with the European Commission. They actually provided resources for our working group. They were very keen to have the recommendations. They invested in the working group. And what I mean by resources is somebody like an admin person to help us out. So the co-chairs were not funded, we're all volunteers. So it kept there was no conflict of interest, but it really helped us meet the deadline of the 18 months. RDA working groups have an 18-month remit, which makes it, you have to scope what you're working on so it's doable, which is a really great technique that RDA has. So let me move forward. All right, so here, these are, let me back up one more. So Costas Rapanis and Carlos Casaran are both employees of the European Commission, and specifically they're leading the open science unit around capacity building and policy. They have been very good partners with us in giving us feedback from their point of view on what would work. This was really important. If we're not going to be able to use the maturity model to affect any change within policy of the European Commission, this wasn't going to work. So having their input was critical, and they were very happy to participate as members of the group, and then also one of the first adopters of the output. Our little hearts were beating very fast because this was incredibly valuable for the team, and it gave us a purpose, an immediate adopter, that if we could get it right, then we would have a really good shot at getting it right elsewhere. Okay, so these are words that came from the slides that have been presented in previous sessions, and we have recordings. You can hear the entire presentation. But what was the way they framed it, the way the European Commission framed it, is open science is really important to their forward mission. And here are the reasons. So knowledge sharing, and if you're not familiar with open science, these are words that were then adopted by UNESCO in the open science recommendation. This presentation was prior to UNESCO, so you'll see some things that look similar. And the European Union was critical in developing those UNESCO recommendations, as well as almost 150 other countries. So sharing knowledge and tools as early as possible, not only between researchers and between disciplines, but also with society at large. So science research really needs to be impactful, not only for researchers, but those that it benefits. And this is wonderful, very hard. And so then they go into some specific criteria: reproducibility, faster response to societal changes, higher impact through collaborations. Remember, we talked about the fact that I didn't give you the statistic, but I can give you the reference for this, of the papers that are being submitted to Nature. So Nature being a very influential journal. They did an analysis on the authors that are coming in, and the more than 50% of the authors are now international teams and growing. Single country teams are shrinking, and single author papers are statistically non-existent, just down into the tiny, tiny numbers. So the recognition here is, we as researchers, our work is complicated and it doesn't look at country boundaries. Therefore, our teams are international. So we have to be able to work internationally, and having data be fair, software be fair, this is critical for all of us to understand each other. Imagine you're all speaking at home Portuguese and Spanish. You're listening to me in English, and I'm grateful for that, because I do not speak Portuguese nor Spanish, and I realize how lucky I am to not have to do that. But in order for us all to work together, we need common ways to communicate, and these are the things we're working on. So not only our language, but how our data is represented is critical. All right, so there's a little bit more information. I'll move forward. So they looked at the Fair Data Maturity Model as a tool that they could use in order to meet their goals. So here are, in very high summary, that they want to be able to manage research data responsibly, in line with FAIR, meaning the FAIR principles, and for data to be as open as possible and as closed as necessary. That phrase is now used internationally by everybody. You never say to researchers 100%, but it's being incorporated into most rhetoric around open science and fair data. It does come from the work of the European Commission, and we can give you the reference to the first time it was published, if that's of interest. So, and they talk about, so now this is a policymaker point of view. They talk about having including within their proposals for funding, whoever is to receive the funding, the institution and those researchers, that they're going to be evaluated on what their research data management plans are going to be. And that is codified in a data management plan. So we are now seeing data management plans being broader. Data, software, any digital object. Solange and I are working on a project where they call it a data and digital output management plan, so everything is included. And that this is something that you use throughout your entire research life cycle. So it's a living document. It not only comes in with your proposal, but you manage it all the way through. This is what the European Commission is trying to do. Then wherever that data will be deposited, you have to select a repository that supports the FAIR principles. PIDs are persistent identifiers, globally resolvable persistent identifiers. So no matter what country you're in, that the URL to that particular research digital object is findable by you no matter what. This is a basic concept around open science and FAIR data or software. And then the next basic concept is that the information, the metadata about that data is easy to understand and complete as possible, which is not easy. It's kind of hard to do. And then we hit on the last bullet here, the licenses, that you actually identify what you've created as being usable by others through the license as open as possible. Here we're listing common data licenses. If you're using software or another digital object, there might be better choices for you on that. Let me check our time. Yep, good to go. All right. So now we're moving into the EOSC project. So EOSC is the European Open Science Cloud. This was one of the infrastructure pieces that the European Commission funded within. Edith, can you share? I know we're talking about a lot of money here. So not every country has the capacity, the funds to do this, but can you give everybody a sense for what funding has gone into the European Open Science Cloud? Just a ballpark.
Maybe I give you another idea that we think that the estimate that how much the open science should receive from the EU funds, as average, it's 5% of the research funds should go to the European Open Science Cloud. Yeah, the current project is up to 50 million euro, I think, but yes, so but it's more to establish the structure, and so it's more a capex, and then the opex it will be slower. Yeah, but EU decided to invest a lot into the European Open Science Cloud, and as you said, FAIR is just part of it. And I think that that was the result of our work, that FAIR cannot solve everything. So this is why we went to the DMPs, the data management plans, rather than just the maturity model, because the data maturity model, it was too technical measure for something which is, you can't, if I like to compare, the FAIR data maturity model is a kind of measure the athletes, and why the open science is more gymnastic or ice skating, with a lot of beauty on it, which is very difficult to measure with the nanoseconds or with just the technical matrix.
Let me say that again. The FAIR data maturity model
the FAIR data maturity model is more like the measurements for athletes in the Olympic Games.
Olympic athletes,
where you measure, that how many nanoseconds or swimming, that's how many nanoseconds you could do faster or better. But in the ice skating or in the gymnastic, they are not very helpful because you cannot measure them with the simple KPI like the time. It's you have the FAIR, the 4 different elements of FAIR is more for the ice skating, if I like to compare. Which is the sport and the art together,
Sport and art together. You know what? I love that analogy. I think that might be the first time I've heard that. I think that's perfect.
You just have to talk to the politician to get this kind of.
There we go. So for those of you listening who are trying to figure out how to describe this, that's a really good description. So the European Open Science Cloud, we could spend hours giving you a sense for how big this project was, but that we will skip. So the FAIR experts group that was helping that effort had 4 remits. So what does a fair practice look like? What is a persistent identifier policy, which, by the way, would be super relevant all by itself for you all? What is the challenge around interoperability, which, by the way, is an ongoing iterative challenge. This is not fixed. This is not a done deal. And then the fair data maturity model was relevant at their metrics and certification. So we're going to talk about that piece. So it's like looking at, I don't know, the universe and picking out the Earth, right? Like it's quite specific, which is important for you to have the context, because when you want to implement the fair data maturity model, you can't just implement it with one team and expect that to impact your entire organization. It just won't. But you could help one team pilot it, and that will then help others. So, and that's what we'll get to in a moment. But let me share this one with you. So what they did is they took the fair data maturity model and they used it as a toolbox, and it helped them to determine what elements within FAIR they were going to focus on, what would those priorities be. So remember, mandatory versus recommended. So they used those as a guide. And then they also took the rhetoric we had behind it about a progressive approach. There's no check mark here. You don't accomplish FAIR and then check, and move forward. You do your best with FAIR. And as Edith was mentioning, it is like ice skating. You can have the technical elements and they could be amazing, but if you don't also have artistic, you're missing the point. So, and both together mean that there are unique applications across disciplines. Imagine the ice, let's keep going with that example. Imagine ice dancing versus like the short program. And I'm just assuming you all watch ice skating. And I do believe it's winter at the moment in Latin America. So this is very relevant as I'm sitting here in a sleeveless shirt. Making sure you're validating extensive testing in, individuals, researchers, research teams, et cetera. How are they looking at what you're doing? And then and in this case, they were testing their metrics, and they brought the metrics they came up with back to the RDA communities for additional discussion. And this was really relevant to help not only, so this gave them an international view on what was happening within the European Commission. So let me restate that. The work, should an organization within Latin America, perhaps partnered with SciELO, perhaps partnered with somebody else, you could then bring back your use case to RDA, and you would be welcome to do that, to have the community provide you with additional feedback. So you can use this connection with the international group like that, and we would welcome it. And even though I said earlier that SciELO is an organizational member, that is a fee-related membership, but individual membership is free. So everyone is welcome into RDA. All right. So the other thing that they realized is the fair data maturity model, we do focus on data. We did not extend the scope when we were first working, checking with the puppies chewing, it's fine. And then they also brought in the fact that there are other groups. Now, these groups have matured since this presentation was originally given, but the Research Software Alliance, that's RISA, working with Force 11, where I was a member actually, now has Fair for Software recommendation. So that would be an additional element that you can take a look at. And in implementation, it's really important to have additional guidelines and examples. All right, let me move forward. Okay, so we've just jumped. All right, so that is the end of what I want to tell you about the EOSC implementation. So so closing out the European Commission work, this was high-level policy, high-level infrastructure, using expert groups to guide what is needed. And then they're continuing to work down into research teams, and this work is ongoing. They are continuing. I believe right now the project that's being funded is called Fair Impact. So if you want to catch on to what they're doing, which I would recommend because there's a lot of lessons learned coming out of this work, that you could actually join some of their webinars and learn from what's happening within that particular construct. So let me take you to a different construct.
Maybe, Sherry, just to add that we entered it not only to the projects, but also to the national, European and the national policies. Yeah, so most of the member state government now have the open science policies, including the FAIR, or starting with the FAIR and with the data management plans. So actually, it was the fastest deployment in research.
Yeah.
Also indicating that that we are not in the competitive field, and which is easy to cover by regulation. We are under academic freedom, so the deployment normally is slower in the research because the researchers are free to choose, and very often they resist. Yeah, they like the status quo. But here I think that it's all started in 2016. We started our work in 2018. Now in 2023, it's in each single policy document and in each single project in Europe.
Yep. So nothing's quick is what I think, really good messaging, and there are levels to this. So I'm going to give you another optic, another way to look at this. This was one I'm even more familiar with because I helped out with this. So the US Geological Survey, so this year in the US, the White House has identified this year as the Year of Open Science. Now, what I want to highlight here is the US mostly jumped over the year of FAIR. So the European Commission grabbed onto FAIR. They knew it was required, as we talked about earlier, for open science to be implemented. The US didn't quite go on that path. They went, they're really focusing on open, and with FAIR is a subset. This is, I would want FAIR to have more visibility. So I'm highlighting this use case because it came out from researcher and a researcher initiative within the USGS. They have an organization where researchers can lift up things that are important to them, and then they have a little bit of money where they support the development of those recommendations. And this particular group, I was actually asked to support. I didn't get any compensation. This was in my spare time. And this was the most progressive effort I've ever seen for any of the US government agencies implementing FAIR. That doesn't mean that FAIR wasn't happening in other US agencies, but this was the one that included the researchers the most and had the most holistic approach and considering what was existing within that agency. So the US Geological Survey, they fund mostly internally. So they had more control over what researchers do because there weren't as many outside external research efforts. So that is important because not all agencies do that, or around the world. So here, the context, and this is a talk that was given by Fran Lightsam and Viv Hutchinson, who led this effort. Viv Hutchinson is fairly high level within the USGS, and Fran is a renowned oceanographer, librarian who's at Woods Hole Institution, which if you're within oceanography, you would recognize that institution. So they led the team. And the context here is within the USGS, there's 5 mission areas, and across the US, there's 12 regions that have, they oversee 65 science centers, and they host hundreds of research products. So when you apply that to the FAIR principles, those mission areas support repositories and data systems, and then the regions do the review and approval of data products before they go out for public review. And then the research projects have publications. So it's distributed. That's the point. There's not one house, it's distributed, which most research is distributed, or a lot of research is distributed. Okay, so they had two approaches, the goals and the methods. So the goals were, they really wanted USGS data to be fair, and they wanted a criteria for determining what that is. They needed to figure out where the gaps were within the existing infrastructure of USGS, the processes that were already in place. And they wanted to be able to walk the entire government agency from where they are right now. So the policy people, the teams that support the review mechanisms, the entire government entity from where they are to where they needed to be to improve and enable fair maturity. This is a huge remit, and it took a lot of USGS internal folks that worked at each of these levels to participate, and they did. And it took outside experts to help guide the conversation. That was one of the things that I did. So the methods they used, they went to the actual data producers. Can you imagine? They started from the bottom. Who's actually producing the data? They brought in use cases. They had a workshop. It was a 3-day workshop, and it resulted in 87 recommendations. Now, I'm consolidating what happened over years to just those 4 bullet points. And these are words that came from a previous talk that Fran and Viv gave. So I'm summarizing. So they landed on recommendations that were that were distributed across each of these across the elements. So the FAIR, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. And one of their takeaways was the fair data maturity model helped to identify what the final goals are, but these recommendations were systemic. They pulled back from the data itself, and they looked at the entire government agency in order to figure out how to actually implement. So they came up many levels in order to figure out what it meant to actually implement FAIR. And that's why 19% of them are cross-cutting. Those were the operational infrastructures that were necessary in order to lay in policy, review, and all the elements. Okay. So, and this articulates it even further. These were the groups within USGS that were tagged to implement. So they already had a community of practice. So if you don't have one, you would need to stand one up. And then they had a cross-cutting team that actually helped guide. This is the FAIR team, a new one. There were 11 implementations. And there's a lot of work for the policy folks. They had to adjust policy. There's a lot of work for all of the science areas to adjust what they were doing, etc. So it was significant. And they did publish their recommendation, and I can pop the link in shortly or provide that to the group to disseminate. They did share those 87 recommendations. And okay, so in summary, let's see. Oh, good. We're coming to the top of the hour. So in summary, the European Commission, when it was investing in their open science policy, the takeaway here that we want to give you is they put a lot of money into to build capacity. You can do it in other ways, but this is how they chose to do it. Invest in capacity building. They invested in changing policy from the funder level iteratively. They got very engaged. So I'm familiar with FAPESB. FAPESB is very engaged within Brazil to push forward open science agendas. This is really critical. And for any funding or capacity building implementation, you want to think through who has influence there. And you can go iteratively. And then the infrastructure, they determined what they would be measuring, what that metric roadmap would be. So you can convert this within Latin America to anyone who's influential on data management. What does it mean to actually improve your open science metrics and apply this in the same way? And again, it's iterative. And then the use case from the U.S. Geological Survey, they wanted to make sure that the organizational change they were implementing in order for the fair maturity to be able to have a place to develop had to include the existing systems that they had. So they took a roadmap that actually built out the additional capability. They had researchers in very early, so they were bottom up, and they implemented in those 87 recommendations the support necessary for the researchers to see the value that was being created by their data being more fair. And what I left out here, and we talked about this at EOS, but I left out in the OSGS, they also had to include all of their other digital objects. So for instance, that workshop that happened over the 3 days, they analyzed the FAIR principles, they analyzed the use cases they brought in, they determined the different roles of the data producers, the data storage and catalogs, those repositories, the value-added services, and the policymakers. They extended the work from the FAIR data maturity model to include physical samples, research methods, softwares, and tools, which is something that Edith and Keith and I are also considering and extending our work. And then they broke that down into discrete recommendations. So that would be another really great tool to look at and see how things were done. So Edith, may I hand it back to you for these next steps?
Yes, so as you see, and maybe you can consult also our webpage, we have now dozens of the different use cases, and we decided to group them to the 3 major directions, which was once used in Europe. It was a big question that we have to deepen Europe, or we have to widen the European policies, or we have to enlarge the European Union itself. So we borrowed this terminology, which is again something which the policymakers could easily understand. So we are talking about deepening the fair data maturity model. Some of the research groups came to us and they said that, yeah, but we discussed granularity in the very different level when we are talking about different science communities. So now we are discussing the granularity, or we discussed that what the REACH metadata means, because some of the questions could not be sorted out. Yeah, REACH can mean many different things, again, for many different communities. So we are kind of deepening our knowledge around the fair data maturity model. And the other thing we do, we try to widen our knowledge and move from the metadata beyond the metadata. Last week, for instance, I was in the conference when we discussed not the laboratory data, but the real data coming from the sensors or coming directly from the citizens through the citizen science. How we get from the real data to the metadata, it's another challenge which we probably have to look, and how we can differentiate the two. You mentioned, Shelley, already that we identified that, yes, we have the identity of the researcher, yeah, through the EduROM services offered by Jean. And now we are working for metadata with the PIDs. But what's about the instruments? Maybe we have to identify the instruments, especially when we are changing the instruments, or we're changing some part of the instruments, or we change the sensors, and maybe the calibration is not 100% identical when this change happens. Yeah, so probably we have to get the PIDs for the instruments as well. But we are widening it also in terms of, we look the other RDA work, for instance, the CARE principle, that how the fair data maturity model can be used in the case of CARE for the people, or with the best to say, yeah, the peoples, like the indigenous people or the Aboriginal people in Australia, or the Inuits, because they have their rights to the data. So what does the FAIR means for the other kind of RDA work? So this is the widening element. And finally, we have the enlargement itself, the geographical outreach and the collaboration with others, especially with the Global South. Yeah, if you think about entire Africa or South Asia, and of course, the South America, where we are very happy to present the RDA fair data maturity model. And I think that I'd like to mention here that in the last plenary in Gothenburg, I was so positively surprised that most of the mention of the fair data maturity model came from other continents. It came from Brazil, it came from Chile, it came from Africa, it came from Moldova, and it came from Georgia, yeah, which are very different countries in size, etc. But they find it useful, and we are very happy that they find it useful. And probably it will be very good for, especially for climate data or health data or any biological data which we collect from the stratosphere or from the biosphere or from the blue oceans. So it was nice to see that how the geographical outreach is growing, how this movement went out from the European Union. So this is what we try to do in the different plenaries. The P mentioned the plenary 18, 19, 20, and 21. So last time we discussed how it can be used for the instruments, and we have got to the conclusion that we have to find a bird of feather meeting in our next plenary in Salzburg, and maybe initiate the movement and the new working group for the PID for instruments. And if you are interested to our work, you are very much welcome. Just join us to Salzburg, either in person or in the hybrid event. Ask your question, and as much value you can add to the RDA, as much value you can get out of it, I promise, because this is the win-win situation for the 13,000 researchers who are in the work, who are in the RDA, but especially these 338 I mentioned are happy to help you, and they are absolutely happy to listen to you and to your fantastic ideas that we can work together. I think that there is no more slide, Shelley. I think that was it.
Yep.
Yes, so obrigada, and thank you very much. Meet you in Strasbourg.
All right. Let me go over and take a look at our Q&A. Oh gosh. Oh, I hope we didn't intimidate everybody. I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A yet.
Yeah.
All right. So Edith, let me pick at your brain just a moment. So if you recall, just as we were finishing up the initial framework, and there were some weak areas that we had identified, and I have you mentioned them as we're moving forward, but for instance, granularity was a real challenge because this is still a challenge. Metadata, like what does it mean? Like what's used in the FAIR data principles is the word robust metadata. There's not a definition for that. And what does that mean within each discipline? And then vocabularies, in order for, data to meet a particular, to be as fair as possible, having a standard vocabulary for the type of data elements also important, but also not fully mature yet across disciplines. And could you maybe talk a little bit more from those discussions that happened earlier?
Yes, I suggest that if the group is interesting to go back to the original FAIR principles, then you will see that, which is something too easy to understand as an easy reading, it's an impossible if you wish to use it for a measurement. Yeah, because then you would need a far more concrete thing. We suffered from all the abstract words. Yeah, everything which is abstract is difficult. And maybe I'd like to use here another totally different example, which I like, and I think it's so visual. Because it happened, yeah, this is what we learned in the European politics, and you learn it in the international politics, that the abstract word has a different meaning in the country. So I give you something from the politics to explain, but I think it's the same valid for here. Yeah, we had a regulation on the European forestry, and we had a rapporteur from Finland. And for the rapporteur, the forest was something with the 50-meter high pine trees next to each other, 1,000 hectares, yeah, next to each other. So for him, it was the forest. While for the Portuguese, 100 brushes together was a kind of forest, the same in Greece. Yeah, so if you look, we had a great discussion, what is the forest? We had a very different imagination about this single word what the forest is. So when we talk about the metadata, we talk about the rich metadata, we think about the data centers, we think about absolutely different things. Yeah, and this ontology, this semantics was the most extreme to get a common language, and it's extremely difficult to do not lose it with the translation. Yeah, so I think that that what I'd like to see here as a very pragmatic approach, that whenever you decide to maybe translate it to Portuguese and offer it to the world, I think it would be very nice gesture from country like Portugal, like Brazil. Then you do not lose the original meaning of what we meant in the fair data maturity model, because we understand each other who are often there. But the same, I'd like to suggest also that if you feel that something is not clear, or something maybe not seems to be logical, maybe you're absolutely right, because you mean something different than what we originally meant. So come to the working group and raise those questions. Maybe, again, not to say something about metadata here, but believe me or not, we have an English translation in the European institution, because the language which we developed in the European Union as an English is not necessarily has the same meaning like the UK or the American original English language. Yeah, so we have interpreters to make sure that the meaning is accurate. So time to time we translate the European document from English to English. Yeah. So the semantics, I think it's the biggest challenge when we are talking about globally, but we have to do it. And I think that I'd like to go back what Shelley said, that if we wish to work on the societal challenges like a climate, like the migration of the biosphere, yeah, the migration of the plants or invasion of the plants, if we wish to talk about health data, we have to find a way that we can measure. And if the Olympic Games could develop the measurements to measure the sport, the people around the world, then I think that we cannot give up and we have to move further with this.
That is super. So, not knowing where you're all affiliated, you might think to yourself, well, gosh, this is, I can't do this by myself. Yep, that's true. However, you can start to talk about, like, for instance, if you would really like to see your organization support fair data more broadly, one of the things you can start talking about are the value statements around fair data to help your decision makers and policymakers realize that an investment in time, at least an investment in time, is useful. For instance, if what Edith just said about the definition of forest, and my goodness, I mean, I know many of you, the rainforest within Brazil and other parts of Latin America is critical to the entire world. The definition of forest, of course, is going to be probably unique. There are many examples, many, atmospheric conditions where you take those measurements. Sea level, what is sea level? Different disciplines define sea level differently. Sometimes it's right at sea level, sometimes it's 1 meter down, sometimes it's 1 meter up, and making sure that you understand what that measurement is. Our vocabulary working group within RDA, Edith, I think you and I were both in this session. They've made significant strides to get closer to what is intended by the FAIR principles. If you have any interest in learning about where things are, that would be a fantastic working group to join. Both Edith and I are watching it closely because it will impact the next version of the FAIR data maturity model recommendations, because we will want to adopt what they have. Similarly, there's a working group working on granularity, and there's no single answer to that. There is more of a best practices that repositories can adopt or researchers can adopt. So that's another group to pay attention to. And you can do it at many levels. You can join RDA at many levels, read and ask questions or participate or even lead. You can actually be a co-chair if you have an idea. But if you're trying to bring back these concepts into your organization and build a roadmap, it really starts with the folks that are your own teammates, and getting them to see what those value statements are, and talking across different groups within your organization to see if there's common interest, and then maybe initiating some informal discussion. Well, hey, if we really do need to solve this, this is something that's really valuable in an international setting. How can we move ourselves forward? Open science has a lot of elements to it. There's, if we were to do a talk about open science, we would talk about not only data, but software and hardware, physical samples. We would talk about publication. SciELO is an open access publisher. They're doing excellent work in helping researchers and make sure their research is openly available worldwide. So that, highlighting SciELO, but there's other publishers as well. And these are all elements, being inclusive, including voices, not only researchers, but those that are impacted by research. Different ways of knowing is another element of open science. So including indigenous understandings, sensitivities, and teammates. If you're studying something that is among an indigenous community, you want to include those members of the community as part of the creation of research, as well as, or the design of it, as well as the creation of it. These are all elements within open science. And you never are finished. You never are finished. Open science is like a yoga practice. It is something that you improve on every day. It's something that you adopt for yourself as a researcher, that you help your team move forward with, that you help your organization move forward with, your community, your domain community. Wherever you have influence, you can make improvements and help others see those improvements. There's a quote in the open science recommendations that I love very much. I'm not going to have it accurately, but I'll do my best. But a researcher not only takes advantage of an open science practice, like you can gain access to data, you can gain access to research, but you also contribute. You contribute your own data, you contribute your own research as openly as possible. And it's an ongoing atmosphere of collaboration. Now, one thing to include here is you also have to give attribution and credit, that something that is created by a team is attributed to that team as you go forward with that research. So that is also part of open science.
Maybe I'd like to quote here our RDA. We have the African proverb which we use in RDA, that if you wish to go fast, you go alone. If you wish to go far, we go together. I think that if it was good enough to cross the Sahara, for all the caravans, this is what we think in RDA, that we try to walk together across the globe.
Does anyone have any questions, curiosities, no matter how small? There was an interesting paper just put out by Zhepeng in one of our AGU publications that actually touches on some of the work of the fair data maturity model, but also puts being fair in context and harmonization. So it's another viewpoint. I'll find that really quickly for you as yet one more way to look at this. But there it is. Finding harmony and fairness.
Maybe we can emphasize that the fair and the open is not the same thing. And we had this discussion that if something cannot be open due to security or whatever kind of reason, should it be still fair? But we in RDA, we believe that everything has to be fair, because then it can be the political decision to open something, and then from the day on, it can be used by others if it's fair ready. So the fair readiness is something we wish to promote to advance with, even if your data is absolutely closed. Yeah, for good reason. Yeah, probably for a very good reason. But whatever is closed, it will be once open. Like the genie poured from the bottle, open science, and the data will come out and help each of us with our 3 wishes.
So we've all run into a number of challenges. This particular time frame doesn't give us a chance to actually walk through those challenges, but you're certainly welcome to reach out. Edith, maybe pop our emails in here. You're certainly welcome to reach out and ask anything. If you're here and curious, but you're still not quite seeing what the connection is with your work, we'd be happy to have a conversation and walk you through whatever you need. If you need something that's maybe a little different, like this is too much, it seems like very hard. Could you break it down into some more basic approach? Yes, we can connect you into something that can walk you through some of the more fundamental concepts, and a number of experts, in your area might also have this information, but we'd be willing to connect you with the folks that we know, or answer the questions ourselves if that's possible. I'm not an expert in everything, and neither is Edith, so we might have to find others, but we're happy to do that. We're happy to do that.
Do we have still people? I see people we are still 26.
Yes,
Any
we do.
feedback?
Does anyone have even any question whatsoever? All right. How about, do our organizers have any questions for us? I give you all an opportunity to ask. So something I do know a little bit about for SciELO is that as a publisher, they're working on implementing FAIR principles from their role. So making sure that data is cited, making sure that software is cited, providing recommendations on repositories, making sure persistent identifiers like your ORCID. ORCID is here, I'll type it in here. ORCID is a persistent identifier for an individual researcher that connects you to your paper, to your data, to your software. And they also can link things together, very, very important within open science. So they are a proponent to make sure your ORCID is attached to your publication. And this is a best practice across all of publishers, but SciELO is really pushing forward with this, which I just enjoy so much. Very delighted. So that is a publisher point of view. And when you look for a publication that you want to, or a journal, you want to look for those same attributes. You want to pick a journal that supports the FAIR principles, because they will make sure that what you have published is as discoverable as possible, that others will find your research as good, as well as possible. And that you and your data and your software are all connected. So that is quite important. And maybe I'll plug something that Solange and I have been working on together. There are, let's see, I can do this in Portuguese too. Why don't I try that? Portuguese and Spanish. So this is our Portuguese version. So this is your journey to open science. There's a Spanish version as well, for those of you who are like, why does Portuguese get all of the credit? Yes, so so this walks you through the initial steps. So as a researcher, as a research team, if you're not quite ready for the organizational FAIR data maturity model, which is a heavy lift, but certainly can be broken down into smaller pieces. And this is, and here's the Spanish version. Let me give you that as well. Okay. So, and that there's an opportunity to learn more, and it points you to checklists, short guides that you can do quickly. So it's a really easy way to get started. So we have 3 checklists for researchers that talk about persistent identifiers, your ORCID, how to make sure your data is able to get to the best FAIR-enabled repository, your software. So those 3. And then we have another set of guidelines for teams, how to incorporate open science practices within your team, how to think about it, how to help change. Like these are frankly new behaviors within a team, and we encourage you to think about them as like a protocol. Oh, the English version too? Yes, of course. Of course, my goodness, I don't think anybody's ever said, oh, but Shelley, could you give me the English version? Yes, I'm happy to. Oh my goodness. There you go. There you are. And there's Japanese as well, if you need that, and French. Oh yes, South Africa, of course. Yes, excellent. I'm so glad.
So we have someone from South Africa in the group.
Wonderful.
In the room. Yeah, so it's wonderful.
Yes, wonderful.
And maybe I give you something different. How the RDA community can be the big connector. I have been approached by the student from Germany who wanted to write about the real data and the real world data and the FAIR. And she started to finish her thesis. Now she is the first year PhD student. She is 22, and our common article it was just approved in the Nature months ago. So if you imagine that how many 21-year-old girl could get published in such highly relevant newspaper like a Nature, the RDA community is an accelerator. We help each other very much within the community to find the problems, to solve the problems together. We are kind of doers there, and and then move together and be happy and celebrate each other's successes. Maybe to give you an example from last week from Cologne, we had this real data and how we can use FAIR in the real data. So it was the researcher who is working on the very, very heavy subject. The children was born in war from the unintended relations, violated by soldiers or by the bad boys. And if you can imagine that, how difficult it is to get data, how difficult it is to get information, and how difficult it is to get from the raw data out of the war region and to make a full research. And Ingrid just has shown that how she could build the FAIR data model for that very unique and very special research. So I think that, yes, FAIR is a challenge, FAIR is a work, FAIR is an additional work to do. But on the other side, you can get to the research data which you could never ever imagine before. And you could anonymize data, and you can manage then the data for the research of that kind, which I just described, the war born in the children born in the war. Yeah, so yes, it's a kind of mission, but it can be done. And what we achieved, I think it was the FAIR data maturity model was part of that success, that we proved that the FAIR data maturity model works, but we also proved that it's not just a technical issue. And the societal challenge has to be sorted out, partially by the researchers, partially by the policymakers. And one of the unintended results, at least in Europe, for all this work, is something called QUARA, that we understood that the voluntary effort of the researcher, without any reimbursement, without any appraisal, without any career opportunity for this huge work someone put additionally on his shoulder, need some support. So now Europe working in this Quora project, that how the open science technology can be part of the appraisal of the researcher, how it can support the career development, how it can come with the financial schemes that you get a better salary if you are making open science, and so on and so forth. I think that our technical work, which proved that it's a gymnastic, it developed something which now much bigger picture, that how the entire researcher evaluation can be done on the way that the people are not only responsible for the research, but they are responsible also for the data, and they are responsible also for the secondary or the tertiary use of the data afterwards for the better of the entire society. We can have the unequal groups who cannot have the access maybe to the best research infrastructure, but if they could use the secondary data from this research infrastructure, they can make a step change in their research. Yeah, so I think that a lot of things started originally from this small group of volunteers within RDA, and now the movement is unstoppable. Yeah. So I'm hoping for a new renaissance, like in the 16th century when all the libraries had to be open, and it's changed the world.
Edith, this has been a joy. I'm glad we got a chance to do this together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if there are no more questions, then maybe we can finish a bit earlier, but it depends on the organizers, of course. That
let me check one more time. I do not see a question. We must be brilliant at asking each other questions. I just don't. I don't think I. Maybe something for everyone. We just delivered. So they're processing information.
Okay.
Well, honestly, it's quite a lot. There's quite a lot of information we've given. So each use case, we have videos that you can listen to hear more about how things were evolved. And Edith, why don't we put our slides in a place where we can link to all of the videos and all of the additional resources and give that to the organizers so they can share that.
We can give it to the organizers, and maybe you can put it. Yeah, I suggest that you fill it because you made the final. Yeah, you finished the second part. We can put it to our RDA working group. Yep. It would be one more reason to visit our RDA working group website. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Very good. Excellent, everybody. Thank you so much, and congratulations to SciELO for their 25th anniversary.
Yeah, and thanks to Solange, Carolina, and Alex, and
Marina.
Marina, yeah, to get it done. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the work and the celebration.
Wonderful. All right. Bye, everybody.